Welcome everyone to the 4th annual Lehigh Valley Yoga Festival. So nice of you all to come out and first thing in the morning, and I appreciate you choosing to come to my presentation, so thank you very much for being here. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Sheetal Contractor, and I am a yoga teacher, a massage therapist, and a wellness coach here in the Lehigh Valley. I do most of my practice out of West End Yoga, for those of you that are familiar with West End. So I've been practicing yoga for over 30 years, but the topic of today's presentation, Live Your Yoga, the secrets to eliminating negativity and elevating your mood every day, this is near and dear to my heart, and I have to say that I probably have only really been practicing living my yoga in the last 10 to 12 years or so, and it really has caused great change and transformation for me personally in my life. So it's a topic that's near and dear to me. It's a key part of what I do when I do my wellness coaching. So that's why this was something that I wanted to offer at the festival this year. So one of the things that we all share, I think, we all are having our own unique human experience, but one of the things that we all share is that we are challenged by negativity. Who here is not challenged by negativity, especially nowadays, right? Yeah, we're challenged by our own negative thinking sometimes, as well as the negativity that might be around us in our environment. So this will introduce you to some practices, some simple things that will hopefully help you to address that. So my intention is twofold. One, of course, kind of like I just said, is to have you walk away with just a couple nuggets, hopefully, that you can apply to your daily living. Because to me, that's very important, to be able to take some of this ancient wisdom, some of this knowledge, and be able to make it applicable to what we do every single day and how we behave every single day, okay? And my second intention actually is to give you a little taste of my group coaching program, one of which I'm going to be starting in the fall after Labor Day. So the type of material we'll talk about today, it'll give you a little snapshot, a little taste of what it would be like to be a participant in that coaching program, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. Okay? I love questions, I love interaction, so please do ask questions, especially if I said something that wasn't clear, or if I talk too fast, because I tend to do that, and you need me to repeat something. The only thing I do request, we are limited to an hour, and I usually do this presentation for 90 minutes. So if you have something that's a little more in depth, you think, then I'd be happy to talk to you after the presentation, and that would be probably a better way to address that. So I'd like to start off today by talking about the mind, right? So modern psychology breaks up the mind into the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and hopefully everybody in the back can kind of see that. I know the writing's a little small, so I will read what if you can't make out the writing there. So we have here the conscious mind, and within the conscious mind is where's my mouse? Did I lose my mouse? It's on. Yeah, it was on. Oh no. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. So the conscious mind, the first thing we have there is analysis and evaluate. So the conscious mind analyzes and evaluates. It also thinks, plans, and reasons. And then it also has some short-term memory. Okay, so those are the key aspects of the conscious mind. And then the subconscious mind is where our long-term memory, our emotions and feelings, our habit patterns and addictions, involuntary reflexes, creativity, intuition, and dreams. Those are the aspects that come from our subconscious mind. Okay? So, interestingly, there's these percentages that are next to each of these. So the conscious mind, 10%, subconscious mind, 90%, and what they represent is the amount or the ratio mental activity performed by each of those aspects of the mind. So 90% of our mental activity comes from the subconscious mind. It comes from long-term memory, it comes from an emotional place, it comes from our habits and possibly addictions, our, again, involuntary reflexes, things that the body is just doing without our being aware of. And then, of course, creativity, intuition, and dreams. 90% of activity falls under that realm and comes from that aspect of our mind. only 10%, of course these are approximations, but only 10% comes from the conscious mind, that part of the mind that has presence, that reasons, that has awareness, that analyzes, that thinks in a conscious way. Okay? So it's kind of interesting because one of the things that as yoga practitioners we do is we practice awareness, right? That's one of the key skills in yoga and meditation and mindfulness, to practice expanding that conscious mind to be more aware, right? And so you might look at this and be like, oh my gosh, like we're really doing badly, you know? But that's really not the case, because while modern day psychologists and scientists do feel that that 10% could be expanded upon, okay? They really don't exactly know, though, what would be ideal. And if you think about it, it makes sense that the majority of what we think would come from a subconscious place, because you wouldn't have to think about how to ride your bike, or how to drive to work, or how to play the piano if you're a musician, right? You wouldn't want to have to consciously think about a lot of these things that we do every day in our lives. You would want that to happen from that subconscious place. So it's not a bad thing that we do the majority, or that the majority of our mental activity comes from that subconscious place, right? However, that being said, we certainly could expand upon our ability to think, to reason, to be more aware, to be more mindful, to be more present in our thoughts, okay? So the verdict is out. Scientists aren't quite sure what that ideal percentage, what that ideal ratio would be or should be, but they do agree that there is potential. There is definitely potential for us to expand the conscious mind and to use more of it, okay? So we're going to explore that a little bit. So this is a perspective, simple perspective, but from modern day psychology. And now we're going to switch over to our yoga philosophy perspective in regards to the mind. And the yogis actually kind of broke up the mind into three components, or three aspects. The first thing I want to talk to you about is something called vrittis. And you don't have to memorize this term, it's a Sanskrit word. But what vrittis are the ongoing mental activity, right? So have we all noticed that a mind's constantly going, right? There's a constant churning, there's a constant kind of activity going on in the mind. Well, the yogis actually had a term for this, and they called it vrittis, okay? And what they said, and what they did was they kind of categorized our vrittis into 5 general categories. So the first category was valid perception or evaluation. The second category was misperception or misevaluation, imagination, sleep, and then memories. So what the yogi said is that we can categorize, and we can put any of our mental activity that's ongoing, that's just churning away, could probably be categorized into any one of those 5 categories, okay? So we tend to think of, I know we tend to kind of demonize the mind, right? Do you find this? Do you find that you kind of are struggling or at battle with your mind sometimes? We kind of feel like the mind is the enemy sometimes because we can't seem to quiet it down. And that's one of the things that I think is really important to understand is the yogi said that the mind and the ongoing activity of the mind, these vrittis, are not a bad thing. The mind is meant to think. And when we do mindfulness practices and meditation and things like that, it's not about eliminating the thoughts. It's not about getting rid of the thoughts and clearing the mind. It's about being not attached to those thoughts. It's about being able to observe those thoughts so that they don't affect us, right? So the fact that these vrittis exist, this ongoing mental activity is happening, whether it's in the form of imagination, sleep, because even when we're sleeping, the mind's active. Because you might wonder, well, how is the mind active when we sleep? Well, of course, we dream. But even when we dream, the mind is still active, right? So that's still a category of activity. So if this is just natural, right? We have these vrittis, we have this ongoing mental activity that's just a natural thing. It's not a bad thing. Well, then what makes it so bad? What makes it so challenging? And that's where this slide comes in. So what makes it challenging are what the yogis call the kleshas. And the kleshas are what we could say are afflictions of the mind. That's kind of like the traditional definition of the kleshas. I like to think of it as kind of like negative potential that is latent within us, within the human being, that has the ability to arise and color our thoughts. So the afflictions of the mind that can color or cloud our mental activity and thought patterns. And so there were 5 categories that they came up with for these kleshas, these colorings of our thought. Lack of awareness, or we could call that ignorance. Identification with I, and we can call that egotism. Desire for past pleasure, attachment. Aversion to past pain or challenge, that could be considered fears. And then fear of death specifically, which is really more of our survival instinct, okay? So basically what the yogi said is, we've got this ongoing activity, mental activity, it's very natural, the mind's meant to think, but when these kleshas rear their ugly head, that's when we get into trouble. When we have a thought and there's ignorance, or there's egotism, or there's attachment, or fear, or we feel like our survival is threatened, that's the type of thinking, negativity that we struggle with. Does that make sense? So these are what color the natural mental activity, the natural thoughts that we have, that the mind is meant to do. Okay? And so if we are having these types of experiences with the kleshas kind of coming up, and we are experiencing any one of these forms of clouding or coloring of our mental activity, then what can happen is we form some skaras. And some skaras are basically deep imprints or impressions in the mind created through repetition of experience. Or in other words, this is where our habits, addictions, conditioned ways of thinking and behaving all come into play, right? So if you have something, if you have an experience and that we felt fear, or we felt, we had some lack of awareness, ignorance, and same type of experience happens, or similar experiences happen to us over and over again, and our reaction is the same, then I like to think of some scars as grooves. It's like these deep mental grooves that get imprinted, these impressions, energetic impressions that get imprinted into our psyche. And while the yogis don't really call it the subconscious, this is what's happening, is that this is what's going into our subconscious, that long-term memory. If you remember from that previous slide, we had here in the subconscious mind long-term memory, habit patterns, and addictions. Okay, so you can kind of see the dots being connected here of what modern psychology kind of sees, how it sees the mind, and how the yogis describe the mind, right? So, I created a diagram because I kind of just threw a lot of words and fancy words and information at you here, but I'm a visual person and it helps for me to kind of see a picture. So hopefully this diagram will help a little bit. So I'll give you an example. So here we have what I was talking about, the constant ongoing mental activity, and I keep using my mouse, but I forget that you can't see it. So at the top we've got our vrittis, the constant mental activity that's going on, and let's say I have a thought. Let's say I imagine how wonderful it would be to start my own business and be my own boss, right? So I don't have to work for someone. So I have this idea, I imagine this thought of having my own business, but as I have that thought, I suddenly feel something in my body, this fear of change, this fear of responsibility, so these kind of emotions come up for me, okay? And that would be the kleshas, right? And maybe the klesha comes up because I did try to do something previously and I failed. It wasn't successful. Or maybe that klesha comes up because as I was growing up, I've heard or I've been told, oh, you can't do that. You're not good at doing things on your own. So those are the kinds of things that could be triggers for the kleshas, for reasons for that negative potential to kind of arise and color that mental activity, that thought of, hey, I want to have my own business, I want to do my own thing. And so if we continue to kind of have those types of thoughts and have those types of fears or experiences come up to color our thoughts, then again we create those mental grooves, those samskara, those impressions are created in our psyche. And so anytime we have some sort of imaginative, creative thought about doing something new and different or changing, that same pattern arises. And so it's a two-way street. In fact, you can see if you can see the arrows kind of going one direction from mental activity being colored by the kleshas, creating our mental imprints. Those mental imprints, those samskara, also then affect and trigger the kleshas, the colorings, the clouding, which then affect the mental activity. So it's like this negative loop that gets created. We get caught up in this negative loop of mental activity, which is what creates those grooves of making them deeper, making them stronger, right? So maybe as I get older, I have insecurity, I have self-doubt. The older I get and the more these negative loops continue to happen in my mind without any other interference, right, in breaking that negative loop, then those types of things get stronger, those mental imprints get stronger. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. So, but notice how there's another side to the picture, right? So we can also create positive loops. So if I use that same example, and I've imagined having my own business, and I have that thought, and the more I'm connected with my true nature, so in the middle of all of this is, of course, who we are, our true nature, our authentic selves, our spirit, our soul, our chitta, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? The more we are in touch with our true nature, and that happens, the more we practice awareness, mindfulness, and other yoga practices, right? And if we have awareness, mindfulness of the fear that's coming up, the fear of something new, some change, some responsibility that we're not familiar with, we are able to mitigate it. We're able to manage it and perhaps still take steps. Whereas with the negative loop, we're stifled. We don't get past it, right? And when we have that awareness, and if we're able to mitigate any fear or coloring that comes up, then we can create positive impressions. We can create confidence in ourselves, right? We all know people who are just these really amazing, confident people. Like, no matter what, they're like, I got it, no problem, it can be done, right? How are some people really able to be that way, right? It's their personality, but how does that form? How does that form? Because they create that positive loop for themselves. And maybe they have had positive experiences to help and reinforce those positive loops, that positive thinking, those positive impressions in their psyche, just as other people may have had negative experiences, right? So, of either the positive loop or the negative loop, right? So, but why are we always kind of gravitating towards the negative loop though, right? Doesn't it seem like it's easier to do that? In fact, like, I'm sure we can relate to this experience of, and maybe either yourself or you know people, if you've had 3 nice things happen during the day. Maybe you saw this beautiful sunrise, you had a great class, maybe you had lunch with a friend, there was a lot of fun. But then, as you're driving home, someone cuts you off, right? When you're driving and it really, like, scares you or something, right? And when you get home and someone asks you, oh, so how was your day? And what's the first thing you'll probably say? You wouldn't believe this beep, beep, beep just cut me off, right? Right, that's like the first thing we think of. We think of that negative thing, right? That's typical. The average person will think of that negative thing and talk about that before, and then you kind of even forget about the fact that you had this really nice day started with a beautiful sunrise, et cetera, right? So there is this kind of tendency, and it's easier to kind of fall into that negative loop than it is to do the positive loop. So that's what we're going to look at next. Why is that so? So the reason for that, if we now shift gears a little bit, going back to modern day science, and we're going to look at the brain here. And the brain, if you can think of the brain and the mind are not the same thing. Can we all agree on that? Right? The brain and the mind aren't the same thing. The brain is the physical physiological component that probably we could say is kind of like in the driver's seat of the mind. That's how we can think of the brain, right? That relationship of the brain-mind. So this is a really simple diagram that I have here about how the brain kind of has evolved. And so if you look at kind of the center core piece, there's this orange section that represents the reptilian brain. The green section represents the limbic system. And then the purple section that's pretty much all around that is the neocortex. And I've kind of coupled the reptilian brain and the limbic brain into what I call the primal brain. One of the key aspects of the primal brain is something called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that is responsible for sounding the alarm. Whenever there's a threat, whenever there's a fear or a threat that's perceived, the amygdala sounds the alarm, and the brain then sends out all these neurotransmitters and different things to the nervous system, messages to the nervous system, and we go into basically fight, flight, or freeze. Okay? So that, when we were prehistoric man, that was obviously really important because there were more occurrences of threat, right? A prehistoric man probably had to think about survival every single day. Okay, so this was really, really important that this would trigger whenever they felt some sort of threat to their survival. Okay. Now, as man evolved, well, actually, before I talk about the neocortex, modern day man, right? We don't have as many actual threats to our survival anymore. Maybe a little bit, but not anymore, for the most part. So when the amygdala sounds the alarm now, it's usually more of a case of emotional survival. It's usually more of a case when we go into fight, flight, or freeze now, current times, because we have a sense of our emotional survival being threatened. Okay? So it actually doesn't serve us as well now, does it? So as we evolved, our evolving brain, or the neocortex, evolved, that purple section, and specifically right at the front there, and so it's kind of like right here at the front of the neocortex, we have a section called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for managing or mitigating the amygdala's alarms that go off. Okay? And the reason this is important, because latest research has found, they've done research with monks who have obviously very diligent meditative practices, as well as other people who have lots of meditative experience. And what they found is, for these people, that part of the brain is really active and really strong. And when they actually do this, these measurements, when they measure brain activity while people are meditating, what they find it just lighting up. That prefrontal cortex just lights up like crazy. So we know that that area of the brain is really important and grows and is exercised and expands with practices like mindfulness and meditation and other yoga practices. We know that from modern day research now. Okay, so it makes sense, right? We hear all the time, especially if you are a meditator, oh, meditation will help you counter fight or flight. It helps you relax. It helps you center, right? And so this is the science behind it. This is the physiology behind it. What's happening is that prefrontal cortex is being exercised and has the ability to do its job better. It has the ability to manage and mitigate the amygdala. Even meditators will say, how many of you meditate or have a practice of meditation? Okay, so we have a good number of people that meditate. Do you find that you still get caught up in the negative loop sometimes? Right? Right, even meditators that are meditating regularly, you might not be a Buddhist monk, but you meditate regularly, we still have a tendency to get caught up in our negative loops. And so, well, what's the deal with that? Why is that? And so this negativity bias answers that question. One of the more recent understandings that modern day neuroscientists and psychologists have gained is this understanding of the negativity bias, that the brain is hardwired to gravitate toward the negative. Negative stimuli actually produce more neural activity than equally intense positive stimuli. And negative experiences get stored in memory almost immediately as opposed to positive, which need to be held in awareness much longer to transfer from short-term to long-term memory. So like, wow, no wonder. No wonder we're so challenged, right? It makes a lot of sense when we have that understanding of how the brain works in relation to the mind and its experiences. So this negativity bias, once again, was really useful for prehistoric man, because it was good that we would err toward the negative and fearfulness because we needed to survive. And it's probably, scientists say, it's probably what allowed our species to evolve because of this negativity bias and survive for hundreds of millions of years, right? So again, useful for prehistoric man, not so useful for modern day man, right? Because now this becomes a challenge. This becomes a greater challenge to us nowadays because again, we don't have those same threats. But I also think it becomes a great opportunity. It becomes a great opportunity for modern day man to further evolve the brain. And our brain is evolving. Notice I had called it the evolving brain, not the evolved brain. Our brain is still evolving. So we have a great opportunity to counter the negativity bias with something called neuroplasticity, which again is something we've come to understand better in recent times. And neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize and change itself by forming new neural connections. And some of you may have heard before the phrase neurons that fire together, wire together. It's kind of become a catchphrase, a fancy little catchphrase that you might hear a lot of nowadays. And that actually was coined back in the 1940s by a psychologist. I think his name was Donald Webb. And so, but only recently have we really been able to understand how this works, because we've had the technology now to measure it, to actually do good research with it, okay? So this is huge as well, because we have the capability, all of us as human beings have the capacity to rewire our brains and retrain our minds. I mean, how big is that when you know that you have the ability to actually change the neural connections in your brain based on how you choose to think? So it's a choice. It's a choice. We're not victims of our mind or our thoughts. We have the ability to change that wiring and to retrain our minds. Okay? So I spend about half of my presentation talking about all this because I find it really useful. And in my own personal life, understanding this connection between the brain and the mind and how it works has really offered me two key things. The first thing is compassion, okay? It's allowed me to be more compassionate toward myself and others, because you know what? We're hardwired this way. Cut yourself a break. You know, I would find myself in the past beating myself up. I'm doing all this yoga, doing all this meditation, 30 years of yoga, and I'm still thinking all these, you know, I'm still going into self-doubt. I'm still finding myself getting triggered, right? What's going on? Right? Cut yourself some slack, right? Have compassion for yourself and have compassion for the other person, because they have the same default programming going on, right? So it allowed me to just step away from that judgment and have a little more compassion for myself and others. And the other thing it's allowed me is to feel empowered. I feel a lot more sense of empowerment knowing that I have the capacity to change this, because I understand that I have this ability to rewire my brain and actually retrain how I think. Okay? So hopefully it offers you some of that as well. So the first universal law that I'm going to talk about is the law of vibration. And Nikola Tesla stated, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And of course, Nikola was way ahead of his time in the early part of the 1900s. And basically, this law says that everything in the universe is a form of energy vibrating at different frequencies and densities. And let me back up a second. The universal laws are actually, you can find the same laws in a lot of ancient wisdoms, Egyptian, Greek, the Vedic, which is where yoga comes from. Okay, so these laws have been around for a long time in a lot of ancient wisdoms and cultures. So it's not just in the yogic tradition that we find this. And even modern day quantum physics validates this, right? And even if you're not a physicist, you can still intellectually, I think, grasp this concept, because matter is basically broken down to energy. Matter is made up of molecules, which are broken down into atoms. Atoms break down into protons, neutrons, electrons. And even now we can break those down into subatomic particles. And when physicists continue doing so, they find at the end, what they're left with is pure energy, vibration, okay? And so matter is energy, breaks down to basically vibration or energy. We have energy that can materialize as matter, but we also have energy that can stay in a subtle form. And that's important to understand, because we recognize then that our thoughts and our emotions are also forms of energy. They're forms of vibration. There is a force behind our thoughts and emotions just as well, okay? And if that seems a little abstract, you can compare it to sound. Sound is a subtle energy, right? It's not something that's material, but I think we all can agree that sound is a form of energy. It's a vibration, right? It has vibration to it. Okay. So thoughts and emotions are also a form of vibration or energy. So why not take advantage of that understanding? Why not take advantage of that understanding that our thoughts and emotions are a form of energy that I can use to my benefit? And one of the things that I always suggest to my coaching clients is to cultivate a practice of creating what I call a wellness intention, okay? So some of you may already do something like this. Every single day, you start your day with an intention, a positive intention, a wellness intention. It can be whatever you want. It can be the same thing. It can be something different every day. But if we actually take the time to create that intention, that thought that has this energy behind it, that has this vibration behind it, we start ourselves, we have that capacity to start our day shaping our day. Does that make sense? Because we're harnessing the power of our thoughts and emotions. We're taking advantage of the fact that this is a form of energy. Okay? Now, we're going to take that a step further, though. And we're going to talk about the second fundamental, or a second fundamental universal law, the law of attraction, which some of you may have heard of before and be familiar with. And the law of attraction says that like energy attracts like energy. Okay? And I think we can all relate to the experience of if you're in a room full of people and someone walks in who might just be a real downer, right? Someone walks in who's just not having a good day, maybe doesn't have a good mental outlook, and so complains a lot, whatever, right? We kind of all know those kinds of people, right? So that person walks in the room, and don't you notice that? Like, you can actually feel that person's energy. Some of us maybe more so than others, because some of us are very sensitive to it, in fact, right? So that's an example of this idea of vibration as well, right? But if someone positive walks in the room, you can also feel that, and you feel more positive, right, as well. So there's this attraction going on with like energy attracting like energy. And the key to working with law of attraction, I find, and the way to really work with it effectively, is to not really focus on your thinking and your thoughts, because we could really drive ourselves crazy. Again, vrittis, they're ongoing. They're just there. The mind is meant to keep that mental activity going. And if we're trying to manage every single one of our thoughts, oh my gosh, I just thought that. Okay, I gotta stop. I gotta stop thinking that, or I gotta shift that thought. Oh no, I just thought that thing, right? Like, how many times are we gonna catch our thoughts and try to shift our thoughts, right? We would drive ourselves nuts, right? It would actually it would be counterproductive. So the way we work with law of attraction is not necessarily with this trying to manage the specific thoughts, but to work with our feeling. How are we feeling? Our feelings truly are the closest barometer to our vibration. And they're a lot easier to work with because at any time in the day, you can just check in with yourself. How am I feeling right now? You know, am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling worried? Or am I feeling okay? Or am I feeling really upbeat? How am I feeling? And right there, you'll be able to gauge what's going on with your vibration. What kind of vibration are you putting out? I like to use the metaphor of the radio tower, right? So if you've got a radio tower, the radio tower signal will dictate what kind of music gets put out, whether it's rock music or country music or classical music, right? So we, as human beings, are like an organic radio tower, putting out a signal of some sort, right? So if we think of ourselves like that way, it's like, well, what are we putting out? What's the frequency we're sending out today? And when we check in with how we feel at any given point of the day, we kind of get a gauge that where we are on that dial. Where are we on that dial? And what are we putting out right now, right? So then, by doing that on a regular basis, we can have awareness, and we can then make that choice to perhaps do something to shift, right? So if I'm feeling down, if I'm feeling frustrated, okay, maybe I'll just pause, leave the situation, take a few breaths, maybe I'll go for a walk, maybe I'll just stop doing what I'm doing, do something else. We can then choose to do something to shift that vibration, then to shift our thinking that will come with that vibration. Make sense? Buddha, from the Dhammapada, Buddhist text, said that all experiences are preceded by mind, having mind as their master, created by mind. So we talked about creating a positive intention every day as a good habit, as a good kind of ritual to have. And when you do that, it's important. So we talked about how it's not as easy to kind of create that positive loop. It's easier to go into that negative loop, and we know one of the reasons, the key reasons for that is our negativity bias that causes us to kind of gravitate that way. We're hardwired that way. The other thing, obviously, is there's a momentum also built in behind that, right? So the way our vibration is kind of like a runaway train. So if we've lived our lives 10, 20, 30 years of being a certain way, being a doubter, if we lived our lives experiencing a lot of mistrust, a lot of fear, a lot of anger, whatever it might be, right? Those emotions, that vibration doesn't just shift like we can turn the radio dial on the radio to change the radio station. That's the one thing that's different about that metaphor that doesn't really apply, right? Instead, it's gradual. We can shift it more gradually because there's a momentum behind this vibration that's been created and ongoing for so long, right? So the way we shift that momentum when we use our positive intention is to work with it and savor it. Savor that intention. Find that feeling and really feel that intention. Feel and savor the good experiences we have, right? So when you have a great experience, like when you were asked about your day, and instead of talking about, just forget about that guy that cut you off. He's done. He's history. Why don't you talk about that great sunrise? Oh my God, you should have seen the sunrise this morning. The colors were fantastic. It just took my breath away, right? I had this fantastic lunch. The food was fantastic. The server was fantastic. Good conversation. We're savoring the moment, right? We're really inundating ourselves with the feeling of those positive experiences. And if you remember a few slides back, I talked about how with the negativity bias, negative experiences get put into long-term memory right away. And in order for the positive experience, an equally strong positive experience, to get put into our long-term memory, we have to hold it in awareness longer. Yeah, so this is how we can do that. We can savor the feeling of our positive experiences, giving us a greater chance of those experiences being put into our long-term memory, our subconscious, right? Being put into our subconscious, changing the habits in our subconscious, changing the long-term memory in our subconscious, right? So forget about the negative stuff. It's going to happen. Just let it go. We don't need to talk about it. We don't even need to talk about it. Don't even tell anyone. Why tell someone about your negative experience and ruin their experience? What's the point of that, right? Just, it's done. It's over. let's talk about the positive experiences. Let's share the positive experiences, right? And that's how we're going to savor them. That's how we're going to imagine feeling those experiences, recreating those experiences, or if you're working with your positive intention for the day, imagine feeling that intention for at least 15 to 20 seconds. And that's what'll bring it, at least 15 to 20 seconds, causes it to more easily shift the momentum of that runaway train. The runaway train of our vibration. So every time we do this, so if we do this every day we're shifting the momentum of that runaway train. It slows down a little bit more, slows down a little bit more, when eventually it can actually switch tracks. It can actually switch tracks and start going in a different direction and has less likelihood of coming up at all. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah, so we're basically creating those positive loops. So what I'd like to do is, I've been talking and talking and talking. I'd like to give us a little bit of an experiential, and we're just going to go do a little a guided meditation here, okay? To give you a little bit of an experiential of some of the things that we just talked about, okay? So go ahead and make yourselves comfortable. So if you do have the space and you do feel like lying down, you can. Or again, you can just sit comfortably. If you kind of want to, if you're near a wall, you can put yourself up against a wall if you like. So it'll be just a short, maybe 10 minutes or so of a meditative experience here. So once you've settled in, just take a few moments to allow your body to feel settled. So just maybe do a quick body scan, noticing what parts of your body are touching the ground. And just allow those parts of your body to maybe sink a little further, to settle a little further into the ground, feeling steady, providing a foundation. Once the body feels steady, feels grounded, I invite you to shift your awareness to your breathing and just begin to notice your breath. Notice the flow of breath in and out. And if the breath feels short, scattered, choppy, fast, that's okay. Just start setting an intention to smooth it out, evening it out, maybe even counting the length of inhale and the length of exhale, and trying to even it out that way if that helps. So just finding that nice, smooth, even breath, continuing to gently slow it down. Noticing the fullness of breath as it slows down. So once we find that nice, steady flow of breath, now I invite you to tune in to any feelings, any sensations, any emotions within your body, within your being. How do you feel in this moment, right now? Just making note of how you're feeling in this moment, what you're noticing. And maybe notice where in your body you're feeling these sensations. Where do you notice these feelings residing in your body? Now, if you're happy, if you're pleased with the feelings you've observed within, by all means, stay with them. But if you're not content or pleased with what you're noticing within, or maybe you just can't really tune in and you're not quite sure what you're feeling, I'm going to invite you to focus on the feeling of gratitude. So maybe imagine someone or something, some condition, some situation that you're really grateful for. And when you think of this person or this situation, this thing, your heart just lights up. Just naturally feel a smile coming across your face as you think of this person or thing for which you are so grateful in your life. And allow yourself to really tap into that feeling of gratitude or whatever other pleasing feeling you might have noticed. Where do you feel that gratitude in your body? Maybe you visualize what it looks like. What does that gratitude or that other positive feeling look like within? Does it have a color? Does it have an image? Allow yourself to really savor this feeling. Whatever ways allow you and help you to savor this feeling. Now imagine yourself as this radio tower that we were talking about. Sending out, you're tapped into this beautiful vibration of gratitude or any other positive feeling that you've noticed within. And now we're sending that out, sending out your signal, sending out the signal of gratitude from your being to the people around you in this room. Grateful for having these people here to share your experience with you. And maybe we think about sending this signal out to all the people in the festival outside of this room. And then maybe we go beyond that and continue to send this signal of gratitude and positivity further out into the world, our local community, our state, our country, the entire world. So many things to be grateful for in this world. And as the law of attraction dictates, as we send that out, we are creating the environment within us to receive that back. So now imagine that you're receiving back a similar signal and you're allowing yourself to receive gratitude back toward you. So many people so grateful for you, that you exist, that you are here in this world, at this festival, in this room. Allow yourself to feel that gratitude that others feel for you. So we'll take a few deep breaths as you continue to savor those feelings. Notice your breath again and take a few full, smooth breaths. Maybe as you exhale, you might even let it out a little bit. So maybe one more nice full breath, and when it feels comfortable for you, just take your time to slowly open your eyes. Slowly come back into the room, into this moment. if you're lying down, take your time to just slowly bring some mobility to your body so you can ease your way back up, taking your time, of course. And coming back into your comfortable seat. How did that feel? Could you feel could you allow yourself to savor the feeling? Could you feel the positive feeling within, whether it was gratitude or whatever it was, right? I could feel it. I wasn't even doing it, and I could feel it from all of you. Yeah, so, 10 minutes. I don't even know if it was a full 10 minutes, right? But even if, and those of you that have your meditation practice know this, but maybe we allow part of our meditation practice to be the savoring of the feeling. Yeah, let's really tap into the vibration, really allow the vibration of our thoughts and feelings to work for us in this way, to help shift the momentum from the negative looping so that we can create more positive looping in our minds. So just to kind of recap, living your yoga, I've kind of offered here, I call it 3 secrets. Think of it as 3 keys, 3 truths, whatever you want to think of it as, to eliminate that negativity, those kleshas that rear their ugly head, and elevate mood every day. So number 1, have compassion for yourself and others, like we said, right? Our default programming is toward that negativity. So if it happens, all right, I know what this is, it's all right, but I also know how to change it. Know that you're empowered and that you can change it, right? You have the means. You have the capacity, each and every one of us. And then 2, we're vibratory beings. We send out a signal. So set your frequency every day. Why not? Set your frequency every day. Every time you wake up in the morning, you have the chance, you have the ability to set your frequency for the day. So create that positive intention for that day. And then 3, let's milk it. Hold on to the good feelings. Milk those good feelings throughout your day. Hold them in awareness. Savor them. Communicate them. Share them. Right? So 3 simple things and hopefully useful things that you can do for yourself each and every day to allow yourself to eliminate some of that negativity and create more of the positive feelings within, and then being able to share that, of course, because it's contagious, right? So once again, thank you all for coming and sharing this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful time. We've got so many excellent classes and different experiences available today. So have a great day. Enjoy and savor it.